Okay, so this what we're doing here is the Shar. It's from the same Shari Ramchal. The Shari Ramchal is actually Ramchal, Moshe Chaim Luzzatto. His basic introductions to Kabbalah, and it was put up by the Mashgiach Panovich of Chaim Friedlander. It was a Talmud of Gessler. A lot of it was from manuscripts that she had from the Ramchal, and in this sefer, he printed in the back of the sefer this Kunteres called Kunteres Klalei Ascholas HaChochmo. And Klalei Ascholas HaChochmo means obviously the principles of beginning the study of Chachmas Kabbalah. It's anonymous. Some people know who wrote it, but I don't think somebody who's famous. It was written in the 19th century. It's been in the early 20th century, if I recall correctly, from the Shar. And it's Litvisha Kabbalah, meaning that it's based on Arizal, the Ramchal, and the Gra. So it's not, and it's distinct from Hasidic Kabbalah in that it's very much based on the substance opposed to the inspiration. And that's a very basic between Litvish Kabbalah, Litvak Kabbalah, and then Hasidic Kabbalah, except for Chabad. Litvak Kabbalah as a discipline and a study of a certain chokhmah, whereas Hasidim learn it as inspiration and to accomplish makers. So, to be honest with you, I sympathize with the Hasidim. I think you learn Kabbalah too dryly, it's tedious. I think it's very mathematical, but we still have to know the basics in order to be able to do Kabbalah. So therefore, like when I learn Zohar, I give a daily shiur in Zohar, 5-10 minutes. So I do it with the knowledge which I've amassed over the years, which is based on starting like this, but without the intense mathematical and geometrical perspectives, which if you learn the Kitzvei Arizal at length, you get inspiring like the commentary, the Sulam, which is like 20 volumes on the Zohar back there, and others for which you have in the Zohar, because it gets too bogged down. Chabad, interestingly enough, learns Kabbalah in a very literature way. It's very dry, tedious, complex. But the other Hasidim, including Reb Tzadok, who was a tremendous book in Kabbalah, and of course the Sasemis and others, when they learn Kabbalah in order to get the dvekas from it, in order to get the inspiration from it. So they're not going to learn the complex. It's kind of like skipping the diktuk Rashis. You learn Rashi and Chumash, the Rashi which are about grammar. You're not going to learn the complexities. You're going to learn the inspirational parts. So therefore, they really learn it systematically. They learn it usually snippet here, snippet there. But again, in order to be able to understand anything, you have to have the basics. And Ramchal wrote the Shari Ramchal for the basics, and this is the basics of the basics. This is really a place to start, and then use that as a springboard. Is that all clear so far? Okay. So if anybody online has anything to say, you should pipe up and say so, because I'm not necessarily going to be looking at the screen. But you have on the screen, on the top of the screen, you have the same thing which we have here in person. Parak Rishon. Bo medubar in the spheres for ushmosa. They're about the spheres and how they represent how Hashem conducts the world and their names. Aleph. Hinei la'avaya yisbarach yikru asfarim b'shem ein sof. Because the Havaya, meaning the highest name of Hashem is Yukei Vavkei. And the Mukubalim call Ein Sof the infinite, right? Yanku Bilti Gvul, because there's no boundaries, Bilti Tachlis, and no limitations. Kshem should Bilti Gvul Bilti Tachlis, just like he, without boundaries, without limitations. Kain Utzon is Bar, so too is his Ratzon.
I
And
believe
that's it.
recently, okay.
Sorry?
I believe we recently had the daf about which name of Hashem Rahman al a person curses and what their liability is.
Right. So it's like it's really any of the Shemos for Russian. There is an issue, but obviously the Shem Havaya Yudke Bavke is the primary name. But there are going to be other names that's going to come up later on. Base Yodusha Ein Sof Baruch Asal Hashem Klalu Klau. You're not allowed to think about the Ein Sof. Now, this is a very basic dichotomy in Kabbalah, except, sorry, until now, dichotomy in Kabbalah, where according to Chabad. The way I understand Chabad, I don't know that much about Chabad Kabbalah, but I know that in Chabad they do talk a lot about the Ein Sof. There's a lot of discussion of the Ein Sof and the Atzmus Hashem. The essence of Hashem. But in other Kabbalistic schools, almost all of them, we never talk about the Atzmus of Hashem because we can't define it. We can't perceive it. It's beyond our capacity to grasp. So therefore, why bother? It's that. So he says it's usher. It's forbidden. There was a Kabbalist to have a. I don't know if the word usher applies literally, but they mean it to be a logical imperative. Why bother speaking about things which you cannot define? And it's part of what Chazal say in Maseches Chagiga that a person is not supposed to be question what's above, what's below, what's before, what's after. In other words, you have a bubble. We live in a bubble. That bubble, as he will say, is called Tzimtzum. So all the things we inquire are things for which we have a frame of reference. They're in the bubble. Going outside the bubble is logically forbidden. There's no it's in the Torah. Let's say it's in the Torah, but it's just not rational. It's not something which one would want to do. Okay? So you can't do it, and therefore you should not do it. You can't grasp it logically, and therefore you shouldn't do it. What? No, they don't. They're logical.
Saying you can't do it means no matter how much you try, you could never do it.
Right. You can't understand it.
You should not do it implies that you have the ability to do it, yet you should not.
No. You can't do it, and therefore you shouldn't try. Okay? That's everything which is big about Kosh Baruch Hu, and the spheros hakom yirtzonov ashkochoso hayidu mitzapulosav. It's all about his will and his control, which we know on account of his actions. V'zeu haklal l'chol darkei Kabbalah. That's the klal l'chol darkei Kabbalah. Ad kan lashon grozal b'likutim m'shevaso sefer safed etznusa shenipas michodash. So the Gra makes this principle, and this is a very powerful principle of the Gra, that the all of Kabbalah is a marshal. Anything we say about Kosh Baruch Hu, Kabbalah says lots of things about Kosh Baruch Hu. Lots of anthropomorphisms, a lot of describing God in human terms. Tanakh is full of that, but Kabbalah even more so. It's all a marshal. We're not saying anything about Hashem himself. We know nothing about Hashem. We can only talk about how Hashem relates to us and how he acts. That's all we can speak about. Okay? So v'chein kosev Ramach Lutzato Zal b'sifro Adir b'Marom Daf Nutes Omrav Zel Shono is what he says. Sham Hinei Masha Onu Medabrim Matzil Baruch Hu. That which talk about the entity from which everything emanates. Latzil means like Eitzel means next to. It means something which comes from, right? So your elbow is called your atzil because your arm comes from your elbow. So we talk about we talk about Hashem, things emanate from Hashem, but we don't talk about the source of the emanation. We speak about what emanates from Hashem. The we only speak about Hashem's activities, and not about his essence, his essence meaning his definition. And his essence, cloud at all. V'teda, and you should know shafilu ma'asharim askim so b'shem ain't sof baruch hu. Even that which called ain't sof. Ain't hakavana atzmus cloud. We're not talking about his essence at all. Ela pulosa, rather his activities. By the way, ain't sof is also not precise, right? Because what does ain't sof mean? Ain't sof means endless, but something which is endless has a beginning. So therefore, it really should be, it has no ein tchila of ein sof, right? There's no beginning nor end. Because I don't know how it works in mathematics, but I think infinity in mathematics is 0 and onwards, right? It's limited infinity? So, okay, so that's ein sof, though. Ein sof means 0 onwards. There's no tchila either, right? So this is the idea that we're only talking about that name also is a misnomer. The Ayin Obasiva Chokum Mukuba, which is actually the first safe in the Sharim Chav, the Ramasli Ne Yodua Yodua Yedayin Shambarach. Gimel Vinay Binyon Hadarke Hanagaso Yisbarach, in terms of Hashem's manners of conducting the world, Esolamos, the worlds, Esespherosin, there are 10 spheres. Velishmosim, and these are they: Keser, Chachma, Bina, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, Netzach, Chod, Yisod, Malchus. Of course, one is missing because they're really 11. Which one's missing?
Sphere.
Which sphere is missing? You guys know Lubavitchers.
Das, yeah.
Das. The Das. Das is a sphere of Keser's not present. And Keser's not a sphere of Das' present. You can never have 11, except when they draw the spheres, they draw 11. But there are no, you're right. There are 11 spheres, which are only arrayed as 10 under normal circumstances. I had my Shari out. I think maybe I left it in the dining room. But in any event, he has a picture there in the drawing. They do draw it, but it's not actually usually usually numerated. And he's going to explain all these things. Every sphere is a midah. A midah means an attribute, a way of relating. So the each is a way of the way which are Ein Sof Baruch Hu, the infinite one, Asher Bar B'Malamos, used to create the worlds, Umanigosam, and conducts the worlds. Okay, then he brings down here. I don't have to read the parentheses. He just brings down all the Maramakomis, mostly from Reb Ramchal and from the Gra. Ayin Sham. Hey, Binyan Anhaga, in terms of Anhaga, and this is something which is going to discuss at length. Yesh HaChesed HaGamor. There's absolute chesed. Everything is giving. Yesh HaDin HaGamor. There's everything is restrained. It's something that Footnote writes. A beautiful idea. He says there are only two basic forces. There's the expansive force and there's the contractive force. The expansive force is chesed. The contractive force is din, gvura.
Because Hashem will sort of do more for us and punish us less.
Yeah, but it's like the point is it's a binary system. Just like everything is binary. There are only zeros and ones, right? Now, just like I don't know that much about computers, but I remember that I know computers are binary systems. So just like you can build extraordinary complexity from a binary system, from a system of zeros and ones, every computer program is built of these zeros and ones. So to the entire world is based on the complexity, it's in all its complexity, it's all its majesty, it's all magnificence, it's all based on that binary system, but all goes back to expanding towards, contracting, receding from. Okay, then those are the two basic forces. And then there are all the permutations by which Hashem manipulates them and manifests them in different ways. So the Yesh Ches Gomer, the Yesh Din Gomer, the Yesh Hagam Mutzas. And then there's the middle ground, Ben Chesed V'Din, which is the Chesed, between Chesed and Din, V'Nikra Rachamim, it's called Rachamim, Simonam Chadar. Chesed, Din, Rachamim. I want to explain that a little bit more. The difference between Chesed and Rachamim, because that's important to understand. Which is that in Chesed, I give because I give. In Din, I restrain myself because I'm restrained. It's almost like extroverted, introverted, right? Chesed is to give, unreserved or without a reckoning, idea pure Chesed. Din is to restrain, to refrain, without a reckoning. Rachamim. How does Rachamim work? Rachamim means mercy. Mercy or pity. There's something which provokes my pity. I can't have Rachamim in the abstract. I can have Ches in the abstract. I can give without something provoking my giving. But I can't take pity or have mercy unless there's something on which I am taking pity or upon which I'm having mercy. So that's the idea of Rachamim being in the middle between Chesed and Din. I'm not giving without a catalyst. But once there's a catalyst, I'm giving. How much I'm giving is also not necessarily the same as Chesed, because it depends how much this thing provoked my pity, how much it made me to want to have mercy on it. But that's the idea. that the rachamim is kind of din until something arouses my chesed. But it's not, again, chesed is indirected, pushing outwards. The din is refraining, curtailing inwards. Rachamim, something provokes me, and therefore I respond. I respond with mercy, but I respond. Okay? So, Vav, Sphere Sakesu Chesed Gadol. Keser is a sphere which represents a huge chesed. Vrachim had Kates. Interesting. Use interchangeably, even though technically that's not accurate, right? But he said, okay, so that happens a lot in Kabbalah. You have synonyms. You have Chesed Gadol Rachmim Arin Kates Shulifia Tachlis Lo Yizbarach, and because it represents the ultimate purpose. Now, the ultimate purpose is behind the scenes. It's not always manifest. As a matter of fact, most times it's not manifest. We don't always see. We never almost. I shouldn't say everything. We almost never see the ultimate purpose in anything. So Akiva says, "Come under Rachmani l'tavavit." Everything God does is for the good, but to see that it's the good, that's very hard, and very often we don't see it. And very often we never get to see it. The famous story of Rabbi Akiva is that he was walking along. He almost got to a city, and his donkey died. His donkey ran away, I think. His rooster died, and his candle went out. And he said, "Come on, what can I do? I'm forced to stay out here outside the city. Can't go there, can't get there, I have no light." Next morning, it turns out that the city was, the bandits come to the city overnight, and they had killed everybody in the city. So had he had his donkey and gotten into the city, had he had a rooster, would have made noise. Had he had a candle day and night, he would have been killed too. So, it was for the best. But you can only tell later on, and sometimes you can only tell much later on. So the tachlis, the ultimate, the master plan, the highest level, everything is good. But you don't see that in the immediate, necessarily, foreground of your existence. So the shetachlis relative loko, because the purpose of everything is to do good to everything. And the truth is that we don't understand this because Kosh Baruch Hu obviously tells us, if you're not going to be good, I'm not going to do good for you. The whole Chumash is based on that, right? But the ultimate purpose is somehow, nothing's going to be completely lost. Hashem's going to be mative to everything and anything. In some way, shape, or form, we can't perceive. But that's Keser. And just like Keser, the crown is above the head. That means it's not something which we can intellectually recognize. We can't perceive it intellectually, certainly in this world. So it's the ultimate tachlis, which is above and beyond our capacity to perceive. So it's almost like Ein Sof. Although there's no prohibition to talk about it, but there's something which we cannot perceive how everything is good. Now, of course, there are exceptions to this rule. The Nachum Gamzu was the major exception we know of, but for even by him, it seems he had tremendous emunah. He didn't understand how everything was good, but he experienced everything was good because of his great emunah Kodesh Baruch Hu. But he too probably certain things he could only see as good afterwards. But his emunah was such that even at the time when he didn't know why it was good, he experienced it as good. Okay, so that's like it says, "Chanos yisharachon afa b'shein good." Because Baruch is going to have be gracious. Chain is grace. Chesed, even chesed, there's a reason for it. Chain is when there's no reason for it. Like if somebody's motzei chain beinai, he finds favor in my eyes. That means there's no tangible reason why, right? It says that there's chain isha, chain makom yoshev, chain isha baila, chain Torah alom deh. Chain is an intangible. So people love their wives even though they're ugly and lazy. People love their places even though the climate is impossible and it's swarming with mosquitoes. And the Torah causes people to have chain, even if they themselves have other reprehensible characteristics, but the Torah they have gives them chain. So chain is something which transcends normal perception. Again, just like Keser transcends normal perception, but there's chanos yasher achon. Rosh Baruch Hu says, you can understand. I'm not telling you how. I'm not telling you why. I'm not telling you to what extent. But there's chen for everything. Everything has a tikkun. Everything has an ultimate purpose for which good prevails. Okay, Zayin. Spheres of Chochma, Gankin Chesed Gadol. Chochma also represents great Chesed. Gam lemisha ein lo schus kokach. Even somebody who has very little merit. Ach lo Chesed kokach mo Keser. It's not so much Chesed like Keser. Now, Gama Bino Chesed Kanal. Now, it's interesting because the spheres are divided into three columns. Right, it's on the next page. It's the next page. So you have the next page, right? So the next page you have Kesser in the middle, Chochma, Chesed, Netzach on the right, Das, parentheses, Tiferes, Yisod, and Malchus in the middle, and Bina Gvur and Hod on the left. So all the ones in the right are Chesed. Ones on the left are Gvura, and the ones in the middle are the mixture of the two. Malchus, of course, is the bottom two. So even though Bina is on the left, when we're that high up, we're in the stratosphere of the spheres, right? So then it's also chesed. There's no such that high up. The differentiation between right and left is very subtle and almost non-existent. Everything is chesed. It doesn't differentiate. The way it differentiates when you get lower down. That's what he's saying over here. That in Zion, gamabina chesed. Chochma is chesed mibina. Chochma is more chesed than bina. Umibina misorin din misorin mena. Because sometimes bina requires din. And he'll elaborate on that, but I want to, just before we get to what he says, I want to explain a little bit. First, to understand things, you have to differentiate. Knowledge chochma is undifferentiated. It's just amassing facts. And it's not categorizing them. To categorize things, you have to understand them. By the way, the Bina is saying Nitno Lenoshim. Why do women have more Bina? Because to understand things, you have to have a feel for them. And to have a feel for something, you have to have an emotional grasp of them. Even intellectual concepts, there's an emotional aspect to the grasping of intellectual concepts. And that women have more Bina. Most of human history, they didn't have Chochmah because they weren't educated. But so therefore they didn't have the data with which to use the Bina. So they had intuition without actually having the understanding which comes with knowledge. But this idea is that in the moment I differentiate, by definition, my chesed is going to be different. Because you might need more chesed and you might need less chesed. And differentiation, categorization requires a modulation. So even though I'm completely chesed still, we're still up where everything's giving, but there's modulation which occurs because of the understanding and categorization which occurs. So the chesed. Sorry?
Like a parent to their children, each kid needs something else.
Right, exactly. Right. So each child needs something else. So that is the it says umibina dinim is mena. Perish the family zeu nichla b'chesed lasos din ba'ilam. And that's part of chesed. Part of chesed is sometimes you have to do din. It's necessary, right? Like, if a kid misbehaves, it's a chesed to punish the kid. Noach Weinberg says, if you see a kid run into traffic, and an adult comes and slaps him, that adult is the parent. Because another adult, okay, it's not their kid. They might shout at the kid. They don't have to educate them, but the parent has to educate them. So therefore, they're going to slap. They're going to slap him. So the idea is that chesed sometimes requires din. That modulation of chesed is itself a form of din. Okay, Peshavon is zeinach b'chesed so din ba'olam. Do din work. So gankin l'toiva. That's also good. Leman lo ye olam shel hefker. Shouldn't be a world of hefker. Oh, al derech ki Hashem have Hashem yochiach. Hashem loves somebody. You're going to rebuke somebody. Again, like we said, if it's your kid, you're going to slap the kid. But there are kika sher yaser yishis beno, like a father punishes, afflicts his child. Kol shlosha ches, kol shlosha. Now all the three above are called an keser chachma ubina, nikul shol shishonis or shol shel yonis. They're called the first three spheros or the three highest spheros. Veim rachamim gedolim. They're very great rachamim. Again, rachamim chesed used interchangeably here. Shefi sherutzoni baruch ba'olam. Going to God's will in the world. Velothia maseh. They don't take into account our deeds. If these are revealed, and that's called usually the anhaga of orech anpin, the long face, as opposed to zer anpin, which is a miniature face. If you have the anhaga of orech anpin, so then as rachamim v'rotzon godabolam. There's a lot of rachim, a lot of rotzon in the world. So that is a very high madrega when these things are revealed. And there are, of course, called also mochin. They're called the intellects, because they represent the intellects, opposed to the next ones, which represent emotions. Okay, so Tess, Spheres HaChesed, Chesed Gomer. This is the Spheres HaChesed is absolute Chesed. Rak, Hu, Lefi, Milamisha Magilo, Bab Masov. But you got to deserve it. In other words, if you deserve it, then we give you amazing Chesed. So, Kamoka Began Eilen Tzadikim. So that's the chesed. Spheres who dina gomor, it's absolute judgment. Vonesh gomor, and the absolute punishment. Lemish magil about myself for a person who requires it for his deeds. If you recall, the world was initially supposed to be created with the midah of gvura. The world was supposed to create with the midah of gvura specifically, right? With not midah sadin. So the world is not able to be sustained that way, but therefore created with midas arachmin. But theoretically, din is okay. You know, everything has each action is equal and opposite reaction. That's the way it should be. So, but it's not possible to have a world like that in practice. Vatiferes, hu anhogam mutzas. Tiferes is the middle ground, ben chesed vadin, between chesed and din, benika rachim kanal, and it's called rachamim. And the calls the name of Divra Groz Al Sham. There's also learned from the Gra, but here it's an important point to learn. Even the middle column has inclinations, right? It's in the middle, but it has inclinations. Tiferes noitel chesed yosim ledin. Tiferes inclines to chesed more than it inclines to din. That's the idea we also have in halacha, lifni mishra sadin. Lifni mishra sadin means, according to the strict letter of the law, lots of things can be we can do tough things, right? We be tough on people. That's the law. Lifni mishra sadin means a little bit towards chesed. And that's the idea of tiferes also. Tiferes literally means glory, but it's usually a synonym for that is harmony. And things are harmonious if there's a little bit of goodwill beyond the precise letter of the law. So that's the idea that even though the dress is in the middle, it still has this inclination towards chesed. Yeah.
Why is this balance? Why is this a middle midah? If the implication of chesed is do good for the good, and it doesn't tell you whether to do anything to people who do bad. The implication of din is do bad to the bad doers, and it doesn't tell you whether anyone should get a reward. But between the two of those, it sounds like either you're in din or you're in chesed. It implies that
you're absolutely right. It's oversimplified here. Clearly, it's oversimplified because din also requires that you're zeicha b'din, right? But he's talking about here in the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If we look at the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu is conducting the world, the way the Kabbalah use the terms, so chesed is giving, and din is restraint. Even though it's not a pursuit in terms of the absolute din, like a din in Shamayim, part of din is rewarding. But when the Kabbalah use din, they're talking about how Hashem is dealing with the world in harsh terms. So there's a difference in the mashal of Kabbalah. Chesed is giving and din is restraint, even though in practice it's much more messy than that. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question in a way which you'll be satisfied with, but the idea is that we're creating a dichotomy between the terminology which we use in Kabbalah and the terminology and the way the terms used in other contexts. Is that relatively clear? In other words, your question is about a question. That's basically what I'm saying. And you're correct. But in Kabbalah, when we talk about Hanhoga, how Hashem is managing the world. So Chesed is a Hanhoga where people are good, and Hashem reciprocates and does that and way above and beyond. And Din is a Hanhoga where people are bad, and Hashem reciprocates and with restraint. Okay, and then there's several things of where Chesed and Din are used in other formats. And Tiferes is when there's an oscillation back and forth, which is most of the time, obviously. But the oscillation is exactly between Chesed and Din. But it's going to take those binaries and making a harmony by oscillating back and forth. Okay, I think we're about out of time on the Zoom, so we'll about 2 minutes left, but very often cuts me off before the end. So we'll stop here for tonight. And if there's interest in continuing that next week, we'll continue. Okay? Shkoyach Rabbi Isai.
Thank you, Rebbe.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Good night.
The way Rebbe's explaining it